Hi everybody, so welcome to our Gun Violence and Public Health panel here. So this is sponsored by the Public Health Alliance, the American Medical Student Association, and the Pre-Student Osteopathic Medical Association. So we have here our panelists, Dr. Leeds in Family Medicine will hopefully be joining us shortly. We have Dr. Vish here, our Pediatrician, and Mr. Hamilton here, our Assistant Director of Community Health Benefit at Premier. And I'll let our panelists introduce themselves to explain more.
I'm Dr. Vish. I work at Dayton Children's Hospital. I've been a practicing pediatrician for 13 years, and recently started working at Dayton Children's in the foster care community health program. And I have a master's in public health, and excited to be here, part of this important discussion.
Hi, my name is Sean Hamilton. I'm the Assistant Director for Community Health Benefits at Premier Health. Very fancy title that says, go get community health before they come to the hospital. I'm a native Texan, so this topic is very familiar to me. We're in Texas and not a diploma. But nonetheless, and they make you pledge allegiance to the Dallas Cowboys. So yes, I'm a Cowboy fan. I know we lost. Anyway, moving on. I digress. Yeah, like Dr. Vish, I'm extremely excited to have this discussion here today. And been in the Dayton community about 14 years now. And yeah, I know the lay of the land.
Awesome, thank you. So just to start off, if you could tell us about the state of Dayton's gun violence from your understanding.
Is this being recorded?
This is also being recorded, I should say that as well.
Okay, yeah, okay.
We could turn it off if you
I mean, we want to get real. We can, I give you the sanitized version. I can give you the
whichever version you prefer.
We're being recorded. I'll give you the sanitized version.
Okay.
So the state of gun violence here in Dayton, Ohio. Well, Dayton, Ohio, like other cities, does have its opportunities when it comes to gun violence. Many efforts have been tried to curtail it. Unfortunately, we still find ourselves not being able to overcome these deep-seated root cause issues around gun violence. Most of the gun violence we're seeing in Dayton is really sitting around vengeful, malicious types of shootings, paybacks, if you will, sometimes in around gang activity, but sometimes not. Not heavy on the accidental shootings as much. That doesn't make the bulk of gunshot wounds that we see. We see it from gun violence. And often, once you enter gun violence, violence begets violence. It becomes a vicious cycle. You'd be quite surprised where one shooting stemmed from a shooting that happened 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, City of Dayton has its opportunities around this, and
And just, overall in Ohio, when you look at legislation, as you know, firearm legislation varies very much from state to state, even region to region. And Ohio, when you look at the legislation, there's different things that can help limit gun violence. So you could say universal background checks that close the loopholes of gun controls. You could say requiring safe storage so that children can't get to the guns, requiring trigger locks so that a gun cannot be unintentionally shot, requiring a waiting period in order to get guns. So I think there's 7 parameters and kind of large categories in which you can kind of prove these laws. Ohio itself has one legislation that kind of sort of requires that the trigger locks be sold with guns. So overall, in terms of how much does Ohio legislate guns to restrict unintentional or intentional gun injury? So that's where Ohio overall is.
So what would you say are the social factors, and just delving in a little bit, we had this gang violence and so on and so forth. What would you say are the overarching factors that play into this thing?
Overarching, I think it results in the proliferation of guns that we have in the state of Ohio. The ease of access is quite remarkable, just how easy it is to get a gun. You can probably get a gun faster than a doctor here in this town. It's just quite remarkable, and I say that from a level of understanding. For example, it's not uncommon to go to an emergency department, and 12 o'clock at night, security does a sweep, and they check the bushes outside of the ED. Guess what they find? Guns. Why? Because they know they can't carry a gun inside, so they just stash it there, go in, say hello, whatever. They leave, pick up the gun, and keep on walking. The availability, guns are sold out of car trunks here in the state of Ohio. Every month, like clockwork, there is the Gun and Knife Show at the Convention Center. Just recently at the fairgrounds a long ago. And Vish is right. There's not a whole lot of requirements that in order to buy a gun. You got to breathe. If you're breathing, if you have cash, you can buy a gun in this state, and you see it every single day. So overarching, I would say the access to the guns, availability is a pretty overarching problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, gun availability really leads to gun injury. I mean, it's incredibly strongly correlated to the United States. 9 out of 10 children that die of firearms in the world die in the United States. That's awful. And it's not because the United States is more violent in any way, shape, or form. If you look at our prevalence of other violent crimes, it's the exact prevalence rate as in every other country, as in every other developed country. But the big difference is the amount of guns we have. I mean, we essentially have about 300 million people in the United States and about 300 million guns in the United States. That's a lot of guns. So it's having easy access to this very deadly weapon that I think leads to the pandemic that we have.
So,
Yeah, question behind.
Yeah, so given that we have mental health illness kind of running rampant as well, so what can we attribute that to gun violence as well? And the second part of that question is we also have a significant military population as well as a veteran population. And they also experience mental health illness, and that's kind of a population that we monitor pretty heavily because we're going to say, don't keep a firearm in the house if you're depressed. So does that also contribute to the numbers, or is that pretty relatively small here?
So again, I think the big difference is the availability of a firearm. So when you're talking about suicides, using a gun, you have a 90% chance of succeeding. There's a 90% mortality rate of succeeding with your suicide if you use a gun. So it's one of the most lethal things that you can attempt. And as pediatricians, we definitely counsel, especially if there's a teenager in the home, especially if the teenager has any suggestion of depression, keep this gun locked, keep this gun unloaded, keep your ammunition elsewhere because we know that's protective. Because if you give somebody with a mental health issue easy access, there's a good chance that they're going to do something. And then if you go to homicides, yes, if you look at the risk factors for homicides, the same risk factors as a lot of the other risk factors for violence. So there, if you have somebody who's been bullied, if you have somebody with antisocial behavior, if you have somebody who has a history of depression, if you have somebody who has a history of family exposure to family violence, that these people are more likely to be aggressive and, if access to a gun, have a higher likelihood to be involved in a homicide. So it's that lethal combination of mental health and access to a gun that really kind of it's on the edge.
And I think to the heart of the question, at one point, homicides did eclipse, suicides did eclipse homicide at one point. However, it wasn't necessarily the gun per se, right? So there are both ways that you use to commit suicide. But it wasn't necessarily a gun that was the culprit or the tool that was used to carry out the suicide. When you look at the numbers here in this region, mental health and the combination you described, it is not making up the bulk of the gunshot deaths that we're seeing. That's not the bulk of it. The bulk of them still are coming from, again, either premeditated, intentional use of a gun to commit a crime or to commit violence in some regard. And to be fair, it's not always just gang activity, right? Sometimes it's a robbery gone wrong, right? Or a drug deal gone bad. right? And therefore, but the gun is still used as a weapon. And so they often don't start off intentional, but the result is still the same. The bulk of the gunshot wound tests that we're seeing are willful intent to either intimidate, cause harm, and then the result is the gunshot wound.
So I guess, and just to try and take a stab at this question, what would you say you would try to do to cut back on this violence?
Once again, you want a pretty loud or the ugly truth? Which one do you guys want?
Whichever you're comfortable
Man,
with.
okay, I'll say it. Well, Dr. Vish and I already had this conversation.
Yeah.
If you really want to curtail gun violence in this country, if you really want to do it, I'm not talking about just touch it or play with it or tease it. You got to be able to do something that's going to reach the tipping point, right? I mean, we can touch it all day and fiddle around with it. It's not until you deal with it on a large scale, and it's quite simple. Get rid of the guns. We don't need them. As a society, we do not need them. As to quote Chris Rock, we're the only society that goes hunting on a full stop. We simply don't need them. And there's an argument that talks about protecting my constitutional right, and I get that. I'm not saying you should not have a constitutional right, but when your right infringes upon another person's right to live, to breathe, we've got a problem. If this was a toy car, and toy cars were responsible for 30,000 deaths a year, we banned toy cars in a heartbeat. We wouldn't think twice about it. But for this, because, yes, it is enshrined in our Constitution, by the way, so was slavery, we were able to amend that now, weren't we? Right? We found a way to do it. But at the end of the day, we are stuck in a conundrum in our country, and it's quite simple. You ready for this? The money we make versus people's lives. And guess what we've decided? We've decided money is more important. It's pretty much, I know that's not a nice thing people like to hear, but it's an accurate description of the problem that we have. So if you really want to start to figure out how we really get to this thing, we've got to reach the tipping point in terms of access and availability to guns. Everyone is not a hero. You know, the rhetoric of we have more good guys shooting back the other way than we have. Okay, well, actually, the data doesn't bear that out. Most guns that are committed against another person, it was a good guy that turned into a bad guy all of a sudden when they have domestic violence and so on and so forth. And especially, you know, he talked about mental health. Well, guess what? When did you become all of a sudden mentally incapable of not firing a gun and not thinking about it? Was it before or after you committed domestic violence? Right? So that, to me, is a red herring, because at the end of the day, a good guy turned into a bad guy just of how pissed off you are that day. But yet we allow it to walk carried in the streets, fully loaded, a daily load, fully loaded, and we're dependent on you being a nice guy that day? Oh, okay. That's my thing.
No, and the American Academy of Pediatrics agrees with you. I mean, they came out with a statement in 2012, and it does say the absence of guns in the homes in the community where a child lives, absence of guns, not restriction, the absence of guns is the best way to keep children safe from gun injuries. So if we're talking about how do we keep ourselves safe from gun injuries, the absence of guns. Now, mind you, it goes on to speak about a lot of legislations that we can enact until we achieve complete safety from gun injury.
So I'm sure you're very familiar with that 1996 kind of tobacco ban on CDC funding for gun research. How has that affected public health degree positions? How has that affected it at the local level since then?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a saying that I live by. Data moves dollars, right? You can prove something, you've got the data, you can make a case, you can put resources to it. Data changes legislation. Why do you think we've got so many groups that are doing research on this? We've got research on cow parts. And that's funded all day long because we want to make sure our steak is going to be nice and lean, and we want to make sure we study maggots in chicken feed and just how much it's going to turn your KFC the wrong way. We study this because we have the data, right? Well, it's quite simple. We all know once you start to understand gun violence and where it comes from and the actual result of it, guess what? The light bulb goes on and you're exposed, and now we've got to change the law. Well, the easy way to shut that down is guess what? Let's not research it. Let's pull the funding. Again, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Do you think it's going to go away overnight? Not going to happen. As I explained to Dr. Vish earlier, remember, we're a country, before our forefathers could sign the Declaration of Independence, we first had to figure out who's going to get paid. We first had to figure out who's going to provide the salt, who's going to provide this, who's going to do this. Now we have to take care of it. All right, now we can sign it. Yeah, it wasn't all for the good of America, we're going to do this. No, there were some deals that had to be cut first, all right? So now we're here in the multi-billion-dollar industry, almost in the trillions if you really want to get down to it. They want to just turn that off? No, they're going to find a way to make that money. You can look at the prison industrial complex in the same light. The only reason why there's bipartisan support now is because they found a way to make money. And that is not in prisons, but now through home probation. So the industry already said, you know what, this is costing us more money than it's making us, so we got to find a better way to make money. Guess what they said? Home probation. They've got the patent on the whole process. Now we can do it. So until they can find a better way to sell a gun that doesn't kill people, they're going to keep running this model all the way through until it changes.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the CDC in '96 that restricted, gun research. It went on to go on to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms that said you can no longer publish where you trace a weapon back to the point of purchase. So if a gun was used in a crime, you used to be able to go back and trace the gun shop that sold it and find that few gun shops were the culprits of most of the guns that were being used in homicides. And something could be done about those, but that was closed out, so that this is kind of a lack of information given to make informed decisions on our lives. And then it went on to Health and Human Services could not, let me see if I get this correct. So it was the Appropriation Acts of 2012 said language prohibiting the Ontario Department of Health and Human Services from activities or advocate or promote gun control. So I mean, there was a complete kind of shut down in our gaining of knowledge. And I think the way you put it was very well, is kind of data drives policy. And if you want to cut down policy that curtails gun violence, you cut down the acquisition of knowledge about how guns are being used and how gun injuries and gun homicides and suicides.
So first I want to introduce Dr. Leeds, our family physician. Thank you for joining us. So we've been underway a little bit here, and while we're on the topic of public health research with gun violence, what specifically would you be interested in looking into then? I mean, we have the homicide, suicide. Was there anything that you really would want to focus on that you think would really drive this policy going forward?
One thing I think would be very interesting to understand is the life of the gun, right? Understand where it's gone, what acts of shootings it was a part of, the ability to track that. And gun bullets have interesting, unique signatures. There are ways to look at that. I think that will begin to tell you, the type of conversation around, gun proliferation, its availability and access, and it doesn't cross state lines. Criminals will always get guns, and good guys don't. Once you really get the data around the life of a gun and its journey, I think you're able to find some pretty interesting things around what that begins to look like. Again, I agree. It's a matter of understanding what's happening. There's so little that we know about something that kills so many people. That's quite frustrating. So yeah, we have the availability. I will look into that. Like and see what happens to it.
And there's some really interesting data and research about apparently when you can shoot a gun, it can kind of mark the bullet with the stamp of the gun that shot it. So often, the gun is not found in a crime, but you find the bullet. And if you could track the bullet to the gun and then track the gun to the site of purchase, then you can really talk about how are the guns getting into the hands of the criminals. So
sort of the DNA analysis. guns, right? Guns tracked in the same way that you now track people in forensic situations.
Absolutely.
But it's available to do, and we're not doing it, which seems
Yeah.
counterintuitive.
It's not counterintuitive, you know why it's not, right? It's not because of data, and it's not because of feasibility. It is what they call the adjacent possible. It's right. It's something we can easily do with technology. The barriers are we don't want this information because if we knew these things, what would we do?
I hate to say this, but how American is it to restrict knowledge?
In 2017.
Okay, I'm sorry. Withdraw the question.
I don't know if you noticed that there's a new sheriff, the sheriff of data. So, yeah. No, I mean it's a I think that's really a valid and important point. I mean I think that we don't see politics drive policy in the way we do in almost any other domain. We see opioids are that's my primary academic interest, and it's almost as bad there, right? There's a lot of political grandstanding, and a lot of the way the laws have changed in the last 2 years, 3 years in Ohio, has been driven by politics, not by data. Such that, we now have we've reduced opioid prescriptions by 20 to 30% with the new awards regulations, for example. Opioid deaths have increased 25%. I had an opportunity in 2014 to present that data to Mike DeVaughn. He didn't like it. He was distinctly displeased to hear this, or rather that I was mentioning it. But that's the point, is there's a lot of data-free hypotheses going on here about the way these policies are being made. And then on the back side of it, deliberate attempt to suppress the data. It's just amazing. I mean, we have restrictions on research here. We have gag orders in Minnesota and Montana for physicians to even discuss gun safety with their patients. Now, is that American? Are our free speech conservatives really behind this, or is it a multi-billion-dollar gun lobby? Listen, I own guns. I'm going to say, I'll put this on the table right now. I don't know, this might make me unpopular with some small segment of the population in this room. I do. I own guns. I store them, and I do the big three, right? I store them separately from the ammunition. They're locked up and they're unloaded, right? So I do all of those things. I guess I'm saving them for the apocalypse because I'm not really sure what I would do if someone broke into my house with this, but I don't.
Where you gotta put the gun lock off.
Yeah, well, but I want that intentionality. I want if I'm going to use something that's so deadly, I want fail safes. I want reasons to go, this is what I really need to do, right? And truthfully, I bought these guns years ago. I don't think about them. I don't do much with them. Someone could take them, and I wouldn't really care. But full disclosure, I have guns, and so I'm not militating for an anti-gun policy. I'm certainly not trying to take somebody's guns away with great fear of the
I am. Sorry.
That's not my big fear. Rational gun policy makes sense, and as a physician, I can't justify anything that is a public health hazard, no matter how much freedom it buys me. At any rate, I need to do a cost-benefit analysis for those things, right? Guns kill 88 people per day. Opioids kill 91 people today. So they're pretty close, right? And 2/3 of those opioids are heroin deaths. So guns are killing more people than heroin every day. Where's the gun crisis? We have an opioid crisis, an opioid epidemic. Nobody says gun epidemic, right? 2/3 of those gun deaths, suicides. Who's that protecting? What good is that going to do? Right? So we have an insane, non-rational gun policy. That needs to change. Not take away everybody's guns. Just fix that. There are things, and these are adjacent possibles. There's things we can really do. You're talking about some of them. What better ways to track things? Universal background check. Keep them out of the hands of the mentally ill. That seems like a really good idea. Hard to execute. As you guys are going to find out, defining what mental illness is not trivial.
Yeah.
Especially if it's mentally ill enough not to have a gun. If I get depressed after my dog dies, you're coming to take my gun away. Well, that's the thing that people worry about. But I think those are, you know, they say tough cases make bad law, right? We can come up with a more reasonable way to get some of these guns out of the hands of people. Did I get too off on a tangent?
No. I think you kind of covered all of our other discussion points, so you're there.
I was gonna say, I'm gonna pick a little piece of that conversation that you just had there, and how can healthcare providers appropriately bring up firearm safety with patients? So it sounds like 2 states it's already restricted, but for all the others.
I mean,
Another 48.
Yeah, I mean, as a pediatrician, it's very much, I mean, so much of what we do as pediatricians is called anticipatory guidance. I mean, it starts from the moment they bring that brand newborn to us, and we talk to them about safe sleep and putting your baby on back to sleep to prevent SIDS. And then it goes on to say, you know, your child needs to be in a car seat, and the car seat needs to be rear facing, and it's a great inconvenience, but this is really important to prevent, you know, a death in a car accident. If you're in a car accident, this is what will keep your child safe. And then it goes on to seat belts, and then it goes on to when they're adolescents talking about smoking and, you know, not to start smoking and how to not to start using drugs. And so this conversation of keeping yourself injury-free, keeping yourself safe, is what we do every day, and we do it with guns also. And in the same non-judgmental manner, you ask, are the guns in the home? How are your guns stored? Because I know that when a pediatrician gives advice, I mean, we've earned our credibility. We've answered your calls at 2, 3 in the morning, you know. We've given you advice all along, but we know that parents will change their behavior and their gun will be stored in a more safe manner. I know that guns that are stored in a safe manner will statistically decrease the probability that the gun will be used for an unintentional injury by the child or by a suicide by a teenager. So I know that my advice works, and I know that when I give advice to a parent, there's a good chance that they will enact it. So I mean, it's kind of like our natural thing to do. It's what pediatricians do. We teach people how to be safe and be healthy, and a lot of what we do is just help people. We give people data, right? We give people data of like this. I can't force you to do anything, but I can give you all the information that you need to help your child be safe.
Physicians are, or should be, experts in having difficult conversations. You know, this is what we do. We do it all the time. We break, you know, those of you who are done ICM with me, right, know we talk about, well, how do you negotiate boundaries? How do you work through the taboos, the things you're not supposed to talk about, the things that, you know, and any other kind of conversation with any other kind of person, you would not be able to bring these kind of things up, right? We learn how to do this. This is a skill set we have. It's a privilege that we have. We're not we're able to do this. But there's also technique. How do you do it, right? And so I try to model this in some ways, you know, and certainly when I'm doing rounds with my residents in the hospital and they have to have a difficult, say, a cancer conversation with somebody, I will sometimes tell them, I'm not really sure what I'm going to say, just watch me, and hopefully I'll get this right. And then I just try to bring my emotional intelligence forward and be a good listener and hope that I find the words, and I guess I usually do. So, and it takes some practice. I think when you're talking about guns, for example, you have a boundary to negotiate and barriers to get over, right? So if you say something like, so do you have a loaded gun in your house? That's sort of like saying, so do you have multiple sex partners, right? That's not going to go over well. You haven't negotiated the boundary well, and you're automatically, people are on red alert, right? Shields up, right? So instead, you have to, one of the tricks we use, I learned this from one of my preceptors in residency, is called permission bidding, right? So you say, you know, a lot of people have guns in their houses. Some people keep them loaded, some people don't. If you have guns, how do you sort them? It seems pretty neutral, right? I mean, that shouldn't be too offensive. And I haven't come out and said, you know, or the subtext isn't, you know, I'm really against the Second Amendment, but I'm going to ask you a couple questions now about these guns, right? Right. So you give them permission to give you an answer, and you convey that you are okay with whatever they tell you, right? So I think there's that gets them over these kind of boundaries. If you were trying to say, if you're trying to decide whether it's, let's say, a person with mental illness has a gun, might say something like, there's a variety of safety issues we should talk about here. And one of them is, do you feel safe in your own home, or are you safe with your partner? Is there anyone in your home you feel is in any way a threat to you? Do you have guns in the home, and do you feel safe with those? Right? I'm turning it around and saying, I'm judging you about your guns, but I care about you. I care about your safety, and I'm asking for that reason. And I think most people can hear that. Okay.
Well, and you touched on something that I do here is education to providers, right? Is helping them understand what does this thing really look like. We're all you're taught, if you work in that particular capacity trauma unit, you're taught to treat the wounded, right? And that's about it. However, with guns, there is a lineage, there is a story that got them there, right? And the ability to at least understand the signs, symptoms, kind of those social parameters that brought that person there. There might be opportunities to potentially prevent the subsequent shooting, especially if it was done in a violent act, and as I mentioned earlier, that payback. So I do think that level of education is fantastic, and I think also that general education of understanding why are we seeing these people, what makes up that background of that person, be able to treat the whole person, not just that.
And our conversations don't always go well. I had a conversation, I remember, and I was talking to a family. It was husband, wife, and they had 2 daughters that was here for the well visit. And I was discussing the guns in the home. They had 3, and I said, well, they should be stored separate, and the ammunition should be separate from the gun, stored locked. And the dad thought that was ridiculous. He said, why would I keep a gun with that? Like you said, it would be the apocalypse. This dad felt that he had 3 women to protect. He had his 2 teenage daughters and his wife, and that he should have a gun loaded to protect them. And I went on to say, well, the likelihood of you having a gun, the likelihood of you using it in self-defense is way outweighed by the likelihood of it being used in a homicide against a family member, or in a suicide, or in an unintentional injury. And I felt like I made a little bit of headway, but not all the way. But I noticed the difference between the wife and the husband, because, she was listening to me a little bit different, because she was thinking about her teenage daughter that was having some bullying in school, that was having some issues. And when I said, an adolescent with access to a loaded gun making that impulsive decision, and I felt like maybe I reached her, and the dad was still telling me that I was a left-winger for saying store your ammunition separate than your gun, and that I just shut down the conversation. But even then, I thought, maybe I'm making some headway, So I think just because the conversations don't go well doesn't mean you shouldn't have them. And I think they still kind of they get that you're really just talking about data. If you have data, keeping people safe.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with having this gun conversation is actually very much like a lot of political conversations we have with people. You cannot win them over with data very well. And you know what? There are real studies showing this is true, right? You cannot convince people with overwhelming data. You think we could. We think we can.
I mean, logically, right? Logically rational thoughts.
Right. Because people will not generalize statistical data to themselves. They will say, look, if you have a gun in your house, right, you are more likely to have an accidental discharge, or a suicide, or a homebreaker, a home invader use it against you, right? And you can say, you can tell them what the odds are and what the proportions are. And in their mind, whether they say it or not, is, I'm different. I'm good with the gun. I'll get to it first. I'm quicker. I'm smarter. My kids aren't crazy and they won't do this, right? I mean, and so they talk themselves out of it. They think that this is the whole concealed carry argument. I don't want everyone else to have concealed carry, but I'm pretty good at it, so I'm going to keep doing it, right? I can handle this. I won't have the problems everyone else does. So you have to connect with people. T. Barry Brazelton said you have to meet your people at the map of the world, right? Meet children. It was about children. Meet children at their map of the world, but that's true for adults too. You have to see things somewhat through their eyes and go, you know what? I get it. I have guns myself. maybe one good reason for me to keep them is I can talk to young people and with some cred, right? I have some street cred. So I say, look, I have them too. It's like, and I've kind of thought this through, and I agree, I want them to be able to protect against these situations. But I'm worried that there are other threats that I might be increasing accidentally or inadvertently. So while I totally agree with that, I think I have to balance it out and say, those other things are a danger to my children too. You and I have both had children, so right, so we relate to this, that I've decided I want to store these things apart because I'm trying to minimize all the threats, not just the one threat of the idea.
And I agree. I think, however, we've also created a pretty false narrative in this country around the need for guns. We created a narrative that says, I'm a protector of, and therefore, you know, and it's really deeply ingrained to our psyche. You know, it's deeply ingrained. And this is often the language we hear around when they tend to ask for or any sort of push on altering someone's access or use of, fall back on that default narrative of I'm here to protect, I have to do this and that. And it's quite remarkable when usually those folks have never taken anything up, ever. You know, there's not a narrative that says they have to protect. But that's something that we've created. I personally believe it's something that we've drummed up within our own society from what we consume through literature, what we consume through movies, music, you name it, even video games. I'm not letting video games say that. But we've created this narrative that we fit into the protector role. And the only way that I can effectively do that is to own a gun and to actually make that happen. And the data clearly bears out that's not the case. So, and I think that's a narrative that really is partly at the heart of this visceral reaction that we have around gun ownership and gun usage.
It's culture.
Yeah, it is.
It's a cultural, and it's kind of a cultural sickness. We say things are culture, but I don't mean that in the sense of, and it's cultural, so it's all cool, so we have to be accepting of each other's cultures. Some cultures are dysfunctional. Yeah. So, something I hope we outgrow at some point, but it really is deeply embedded. And I think, by the way, the Second Amendment really doesn't actually say the things that everyone says it says. It doesn't say everybody can have as many guns as they want and they can have them for whatever reason. It says a well-ordered militia, et cetera, et cetera. The fact is, though, our culture is absolutely gun crazy. We love them, and we think we need to protect, just like you're saying. And so the Second Amendment now gets sort of interpreted to suit that purpose. And again, I'm not against. I think we have to be realistic. I'm a left-leaning person. I think you have figured that out. But I think we have to have a reasonable compromise here. And I don't want to make people afraid about losing their guns or whatever. I'm happy for incremental progress here. I just want people to be safe. We're docs. We are all docs in this room at some stage of development or another. And our job is to heal people, protect people, do preventive health. And I would rather, some of you are going to end up surgeons one day, so you'll get to take bullets out of people. But I guarantee you, the patient will do better if the bullet doesn't enter the body in the first place. Never special. So that's how, I just see this as just one more way that we protect the people that are in our charge.
So another question here that we kind of touched on a little bit is how can we reduce the purchasing of new guns, if that makes sense? Not exactly by law per se, but perhaps by molding or remolding the culture, as we've been talking about. But even if you want to go down the law route as well, really, if anything, would you go on that? So, big question.
Purchasing guns?
Yeah, either purchasing or even just acquiring, however that may be done.
I mean, it might have directly deal with the question, but current topic right now is around the alteration of goods, right? We're talking about that, long stock, all that, and converting, and so on and so forth. Again, for me, that's the cherry on top. That's also sprinkles on the cake. that really will, it's not going to solve the bulk of the problem. However, it does curtail the ability to inflict massive casualties, in a given moment, right? We're talking about the ability to purchase assault-type weaponry in a civilian population. Why would anyone need an assault weapon? And I would even ask our sport enthusiasts, and I know several of them. I've gone hunting before. I've gone hunting before, and what's interesting is the dual story of we're sportsmen, but you have an assault weapon. Well, I can hit anything with an assault weapon. I mean, I don't understand why I need to pump out 30 rounds very quickly to hit a deer. That's always an interesting conversation. But I do think there is a conversation around purchasing, the ability to purchase assault-type weapons, again, in a setting that makes that there's not a real reason to have them. If there could be legislation that begins to chip away, if you will, at the ability to have these type of weapons, yeah, that is a place to start. It seems like we're starting with the mechanism first, and I think as recent talks, I think those need to kind of put it away. But I just think we've got to figure out a better way to think through our obsession of having the biggest, loudest, the weapon that inflicts the most harm. Again, I go back, and I'm logical, I guess, probably, to what end, what cause.
So,
I mean, and I think, it gets to the idea of, this idea of guns. We have to have guns to protect ourselves. And when we look at why people have guns, I mean, the two major reasons are self-protection and for hunting. And I think self-protection now precedes hunting. And hunting is one thing, but when it comes to self-protection, there's this idea that if you make guns illegal, that only criminals are going to have guns, and that's not necessarily the case. It's not been the case in other countries. If you look at Australia, that went through a buyback program after a mass shooting, and then their rates of homicides and suicides, how they've just dropped. So this idea of, it's not necessarily true that if you make guns illegal, only criminals will have the guns, and this idea of getting away from I need to have a gun to protect my family because, I'm a single mom and I have my kids, and what am I going to do? I have to have them because, the bad guy's going to come and get me. It ends up just having that our country has a serious problem with gun violence because we have gun violence.
I don't think you can socially engineer culture, though. We've tried to do that. We've tried to change language and change culture that way, and try to make culture feel and think, shame people into having a different opinion about guns. And that's kind of backfired.
No problem.
So I think it comes down to you have to interdict demand or supply. And I don't know how to do that with demand because it's culturally driven. So I want to leave that alone and say, what can you do to interdict supply? And two things kind of hurt me. One is if you can get enough votes to push through gun manufacturer liability in Congress, make that stick, where gun manufacturers now have to have some legal liability for the way their instruments are being used. A couple things are going to happen if you do that. One is that they're going to probably make fewer guns because, or they're going to have to balance the cost of the liability, and it's going to drive gun prices up, and so it's going to be harder to get them. And so in that sense, you can interdict supply. So that's one way. Another way is, I think someone touched on the bioidentification schemes for guns. So that would, in a way, indirectly affects both demand and supply. It'll make guns more expensive. It will also make them more specific and particular to their use, and in some ways less popular, right? I mean, it's like, well, okay, I want this gun for self-defense, but it's going to have this equipment associated with it, and I can't use anybody else's either. So it will force people to be more responsible about guns, and at some level, I think people in the cowboy mentality is they don't really want to be more responsible about guns. They want the power of guns. So
But technology exists to make guns safer. I mean, there's technology where you have to be wearing a watch that correlates with the gun in order to discharge that gun. And what does that do? It gets rid of unintentional, it gets rid of, like, you know, if somebody steals your gun, unless they go out of the way to get the watch also. I mean, so there's, technology exists, we're just not using it.
yeah, I mean, you could probably make a gun that was relatively suicide-proof. The technology probably exists too. I mean, the iPhone 10 knows it's you. Right? Put that chip in the gun itself, right?
I mean, the technology exists, it's not being used. It's just that.
And there's a reason why it's not used.
To kind of piggyback on that a little bit, I know most studies on like gun laws and how different restrictions can affect them for 5 years or less in duration. And a few studies I've read said that if you restrict the supply, you know, it doesn't have as big of a decrease as you would expect because of the fact there are still so many people that have, you know, 5 to 20 guns in their house already. So on the flip side, rather than managing the supply, how would you kind of, what do you think should be put into place trying to manage what is currently out there now?
You mentioned buyback programs, that would be one thing.
Yeah.
Retrofits, you know, you could mandate retrofitting your gun with some technology. Those are possible.
You know, kind of going back to the earlier question of research, our best estimate is that there are 300 guns. We actually don't know how many are really out there. Yeah, that's our best guess, based on sales and et cetera, but you know, you really don't have a clear number, which is again quite ironic. We can tell you how many cars are out there, you know, very quite quickly, but we can't tell you how many guns are out there. And there is a conversation I think that can be had that talks about how do we deal with the current supply that is currently circulating our population. Any attempt to do that, again, is a misreaction because now there's a gun registry, right? And any calls for that are quickly shut down by gun enthusiasts or advocates and lobbyists, specialist groups. So I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle. And as I was talking about Vish earlier, you know, after Sandy Hook, if there was ever an opportunity to really have a conversation, that was it. I mean, you're talking about innocent children who had nothing to do with anything, lost their lives because someone, you know, because they could. And oftentimes we don't say that. We often quickly say, oh, mental health, we've got this. The truth is, they're often not mentally ill. It's because they could. That's something we haven't heard. You know, the guy recent Las Vegas shooting, was he mentally ill? Was he? No, he did it because he could.
When you talk about Sandy Hook, the thing is when you talk about kids dying in the United States, I think the research, I think it says 126 classrooms filled, so Sandy Hook. And then 126 classrooms filled every year, children die from gun violence. That's a lot of kids. When you think about the tragedy of one filled classroom with children dying, 2, 10, 126, that's a lot of kids.
You know, as mentioned, I'm from Texas, okay, so I'll put my disclaimer. Look,
I'm so sorry.
I'm from the country of Texas, and you know, I get the culture. Okay, I grew up in the culture. I'm from a small town called Sweetwater, Texas. That's as small as it sounds. Okay, it is. You know, all right, I get it. I've got friends who, you know, go out shooting every weekend. Friends who go hunting. I've been with them. Okay, I understand the heritage of passing the gun down to the child, and I completely understand it. I am not opposed to it. I get it. Work around it. Where a lot of that begins to fall short with me is the randomness of what we're dealing with. As I think Dr. Leeds adequately said, was that, you know, it's not me. It's not me. I'm sure the kid at Sandy Hook didn't think they would wake up that morning and have to deal with that tragedy, right? And as she said,
126 classrooms full of children.
126 classrooms full of children die every day.
Every year.
Every year. Now, I've got a 2-year-old, okay? I'm gonna be scared to death when it's time for her to go to school, because her classroom could be one of those 126. And I think what we've done in this country, the psyche of this country, and this conversation earlier, is that we've neglected to realize that what affects one affects us all. You know, we have this cognitive dissonance that we often put up. Oh, it's not me. That's not going to happen to me. You know, that's someone else. That's not me. But in reality, it could be you. You know, if you had to pull a number and say, okay, you've got a 1 in X amount of chance of your child dying, and you pick, if you don't pick right and pick wrong, hey, it's your time, sorry. I would say let's not have to pick. Why do we have to have that discussion? Why do we have to have it to where someone has to die because you want to feel that you can protect something? That to me is a fundamental conversation that we are just struggling to deal with because it's not me, it's going to happen to someone else. Like I said, everyone thinks it's not them until it's them.
Well, I like to say that human threat analysis is faulty. You know, we're really bad at generalizing from the general to the specific. We're really bad at threats that are slow poisons. We're really bad at that, right? So smoking, right? Every smoker knows they can get lung cancer, but they all think they won't, which is why they don't quit, among other reasons, right? But very few will say, well, something's got to kill me, you know, and then, well, okay, I'll get cancer. But most of them think, yes, that happens to people, but not me, right? And this is faulty threat analysis. And what do we have? We have a slow poison, right? It's something that takes a long time to kill you. Everybody knows crack's a bad idea. It can kill you in a year or less, right? You know, methamphetamine kill you in a year or less, probably, you know. Tobacco might take 20, 30, 40 years to kill you, right? So it's like, well, then I can convince myself it's really a threat to others, but not myself. This is something built in, it's a huge lacuna, built-in blind spot in our threat perception. It's just there. So when you realize that, you think, well, how do you ever get anybody to have a behavior change under those circumstances? Well, I don't have a magic formula for that, but I do observe, and this is what you mentioned before, Dr. Vish, that, you know, something happened in the national psyche of Australia that made them wake up one day and listen, they got as much of a cowboy heritage as we do, probably worse. They started with a prison colony, man. Lockheed Bay, you know. So, right, you know, there's and I have friends that live there, and they have the most machismo culture you could ever imagine. It's like it's probably Texas Square.
Yeah,
right?
I was just in Australia about a month ago.
You know, listen, it has, and there are many other fine things about the place, you know, and I don't want to overgeneralize about it, but that's there, that's woven into the culture there, right? And yet, somehow they all woke up one day and said, enough. Something catalyzed. I'd love to, we should study that and figure out, and see how we can put that lightning in a bottle and reproduce it here, because I believe we can. You know, look at what happened with the Obergefell decision in gay marriage in 2016. Like, you know, 2006, we had anti-gay marriage amendments in 14 states or something, right? I mean, state amendments, no, you know, marriage is man or woman. You wake up one day in the Supreme Court, which is densely populated by conservative justices, woke up and they changed their mind. They changed the entire country. They changed overnight. This is how change happens. It's sometimes shocking.
But that's just it. You know, it was punted to the Supreme Court, you know, versus the legislative body dealing with this. Probably should have and could have. I think the same thing when it comes to guns. You know, unfortunately, we're locked in this political gridlock, or like that term, we don't say that, but we are locked in this gridlock. To your point, I would love to understand, what did Australia do? What did their legislative body finally figure out that we did not figure out? That said, politics be damned, we've got to figure something out here. And to me, I'm a firm believer that there are some things just greater than money in politics. There are some things that there are certain things that should not be subject to the invisible hand of capitalism. There are some things we have to hold at a higher value than how much money we make from it. And it's not until, I believe, we can come to that realization, and your political career, whatever it is, your ambitions, finally outweigh that be honest with you, given what we're seeing today, it's a far cry. I think we're only, to me, it seems as if we're only exposing just how far we are from that state of coming to that place. And you know what? Some things are just worth more than.
And then you never know. And then you just have to hit that point of, it's what the Buddhists call the ripening of karma. You know, it seems like nothing's moving, nothing's changing. Boom, it happens. It's ready. The time comes, right? You know, we're in a period of major tumult socially right now. It's hard to say. You know, we feel like we're going backwards. I do. You know, sometimes you take 3 steps forward and then you take 3 steps backwards and then 4 steps forward.
The pendulum could swing.
Yeah. So.
But then sometimes I think, you know, in reaction to what you were saying, and that people say, oh, it's not me. But as a mother, I'm always thinking, how do I keep my child in the safest environment possible? How do I reduce the risk that surrounds them? I mean, everything from like, I try to place myself in the best school district where most of the kids graduated, just in case, so no sort of the general wave my kid goes with them. I mean, in everything that I do, I think about how do I minimize the risk to my child? You know, I mean, I was doing research for this panel, and I was seeing that, you know, the risk of a child committing suicide is significantly larger if you live in a high gun state where there's a high proportion of guns to the population versus a low gun state. What's the first thing I do? Desperately, I check to make sure that I don't live in a high gun state, to make sure that I'm not increasing the risk for my kid, you know? And there's like this, so the whole risk mentality works.
You have to be
For
careful
me,
about
in my
moving
head.
from state to state for that, though, you know.
Yeah.
Like you move from the gun state, and now you're in the heart attack state, or the kidney stone state. It's like every state has its known for something.
Yes. But, you know,
10 more questions.
sorry. We're just going on.
Yeah,
At that point, I think it's time for a new question.
All right, we'll do a new question. So, piggybacking off the idea of Australia, that Australia has had, you know, these more restrictive gun laws. I guess we could put, or at least they have their buyback program that's in place. There's the other side that says, look at Chicago. Chicago has the strictest gun laws, and yet they have one of the highest homicide rates. So how do we play that off? I mean, is there some lie in one versus the other?
Next to Indiana, the most lax gun laws. So, I mean, really, Pratt State, there's nothing restricting a gun from going to 20 miles.
I think that's bogus data. I mean, it's not like Chicago is a hermetically sealed environment.
Right.
There's, you know, it's probably a shipping node for all sorts of bad things, guns and drugs and everything else, you know. But I don't think local laws are really a solution anyway. So if you have restrictive gun laws, you're probably not doing anything effective, and then you misread your denominator then in terms of, well, you've got a lot of crime there, and imagine that it should be proportional to these restrictive gun laws that are actually having no effect whatsoever, and draw the conclusion that the laws are ineffective. Well, I could have told you that before you passed the local laws. You can't do it at the local level.
I think it's an argument for federal legislation, because unless you enact the entire country, I mean, guns can be shipped from one area to another very easily.
And laws have to be enforced. That's a part of this as well. I mean, so that's often a well-stated concern. Well, Chicago has the most strictest gun laws. Okay, great. But again, actually enforcement. I mean, Emancipation Proclamation was slavery free for quite some time. Took us a while to get that one done. That didn't. Why? It wasn't enforced. So even today, when you look at the Civil Rights Act and movement, there's still parts of the world, this country, I should say, still haven't fully got the civil rights thing down. I mean, I'll give you a real life example. My father-in-law grew up on a plantation, grew up on a plantation. He literally, from Mississippi, he was the first person to go to college in his family. He left the plantation, 12 brothers and sisters left. He went on to get a college education and working in Chicago, ironically, Sears, so on and so forth. He went back to Mississippi, and guess what? He literally bought, kid you not, he bought their debt for them to no longer be under the owners, got the right term now, the owners' debt. Guess what year this was? It was 1989. We're not talking about 40s, 20s, 1989. Hillary wrote a check for $3 grand. That's all it took. So when we talk about, you know, local laws, it's got to be enforced. We got to need it. We got to want to do it. And I agree. A federal law, I think it will be the first place to start. But then there's got to be enforcement even at the local levels. It's got to be a complete look at the whole thing. Again, it's got to be a tipping point. We can't just chip away at this. This is something where you can't just toy around with, otherwise it's going to swallow its whole every single time. And then any effort that creeps up, if it's not done fully, it's going to say, ah, see, we told you, that didn't work. Well,
the other thing, indirectly, is probably a tremendous influence on this whole process is our current state of campaign finance. And we desperately need campaign finance reform. We desperately. We're, you know, Citizens United went in the exact wrong direction with this. And, you know, liberals and conservatives can agree about this. We do not need money to be your vocal multiplier, right? You have a voice in government exactly before. It's not one man, one vote. It's $1, one vote, you know? And so the NRA has achieved a astronomically disproportionate influence over our political process, because there's so much money going in and out of that organization. And Republican congressmen in particular are terrified of the NRA. They don't dare cross the NRA. They're just far too powerful, far too influential. You know, I would love to have, like in Finland, publicly financed campaigns, period, end of story. You don't get to buy a vote, you're done, right? How much influence would the NRA wield under those circumstances with their budget of $65 a year, which is my fantasy? Again, I'm not anti-gun. I am definitely anti-NRA, because I don't think they promote in any way rational gun policy. But anyway, I think we do keep coming back around to this, you know. And it isn't, obviously, it isn't just guns. It's the tobacco lobby, it's big pharma, it's a lot of other entities that exert their influence through our misshapen campaign policy.
So,
I remember watching the documentary with Katie Couric called Under the Gun, and it was like after they were showing how laws have changed after St. Hood, after Aurora, and one of the interesting things, like after all these mass shootings, there's not a reduction in gun sales, but a massive increase, and just how the NRA, again, they were showing how they stop researching these things, and how they sponsor all these events, and how it's related to like crime and other things. And I just seem like we have buyback policies in some local jurisdictions, but not national. It just seems how Americans don't respond to gun laws by saying, hey, stop guns, or oh, not coming to me, now I need a gun. And the NRA, I don't know, this chief or president at the time was saying, like they spread the logic that the only thing that stops the bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. People just need that. They're like, oh, we need guns. I mean, be a hero, man. How to change that?
Well, their narrative is the solution to gun violence is more of this, right? Right. And it's superficially, you can sort of imagine, you know, you can get people to think through the sort of event logic that gets you there, right? I read on Medscape. Did any of you read it had a panel very much like this one. It was a surgeon, this trauma surgeon was on the panel, who said, "Will not be safe until nobody knows who has a gun." That sounds like a bad, really, really bad. And then she's drumming up business. She is a trauma surgeon. You know, I just thought that is just wild. Right? What an idea. And then I thought, okay, you walk into Walmart. There's like 120 people you can see walking around in various states of undressed and undressed. You know, they're there in their sweatpants, whatever. You know, you're there with you, and you're looking at them. You don't know anything about them, but you know that 25% of them have guns now, or 30, 50, whatever. Everybody. How good do you feel? You don't know these people at all. How safe do you feel knowing all those people are armed? And you have no idea how good they are at using the weapon or how mentally sound they are or anything. Do you feel safer because 25% of a random population that you're locked in a building with at the moment are armed? There was some shooting that happened, was it out in, say, Nevada, But anyway, on the security cameras, they captured 14 people had drawn concealed weapons because of this. There was a shooter there, and the security team was trying to figure out who the shooter was because all these people had their guns out, right? And you know, it's sort of that circular firing squad thing, right? If you're all shooting this way,
Yep.
right?
Well, it's like the Wild Wild West. How safe a time was that? And everyone had a gun then. No, that didn't feel good. And then the whole narrative that more firearms will help. Again, I try to apply logic, forgive me for this, but you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with water. Put it out, right? I don't understand now one reason why you need more of a problem to fix the problem. But it's a narrative that has, I mean, you gotta give them credit. You guys are geniuses. They basically created any scenario that a gun is a solution to your problem. More violence? Hey, you need a more gun. Less violence? Hey, you need a gun. I mean,
but I'm with the old school, but
shootings,
data should drive policy. I mean, data, numbers are numbers. Numbers are not subjective. Numbers are, you simply look at
and they're
guns.
uncompelling, Dr. Vish, that's the problem.
But it takes people in leadership roles. It takes stakeholders in our community. It takes physicians and politicians that care about the people to say, data needs to drive policy. It needs to not be this insanity of misinformation. I mean, you look at the numbers, you look at and say, how do we, with this data, minimize risk? I mean, it has to drive policy because it gets insanity. It gets insane. Let's give a gun to every school teacher in case there's, I mean, it's ridiculous.
That's happening now.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
The problem is the politics, the politicians, again, they're not beholden to we the people. They're beholden to we the money. It ain't about us anymore.
But data needs to drive policy, period.
It should, but
we need to say we need to do what's best for the people. Done. I mean, is that so hard?
No, hey, I get it. I got a quote. Write this down.
I mean, it feels crazy.
I got a quote, and it helps me. If it doesn't make sense, it's because it's about dollars. Sense mean, yeah, you got it right. If it don't make sense, it's about dollars. I swear. I mean, so I don't get this because it's about money, and I hate to be the broken record. It's often about money. It's often about power, money, etc., etc. It keeps going back to the same old conversation. You're exactly right. This is simple. Unfortunately, it doesn't make sense. It's about dollars.
Well, it's also about fear, and so this is how maybe people are making money on the business end of this, but this is how they sell it, is with fear. You have a reason to be afraid.
Yep.
I mean, you listen to people who are pro-gun people, and they don't just talk about home invasions. They don't just talk about stopping a holdup at the Walmart. They talk about stopping the government. The government who owns things like bunker busters and Moab rockets, right? You're going to stop them with your Kelty 9mm, No, this is what people feel though. It's like I may need to rise up against the government. I need to protect myself from those people. Right? There's a heavy overlay of, by the way, this is no surprise to a lot of you here, but the sort of gun sentiment and racism and
no way.
Islamophobia. Right? These are, well, look what happened to Philando Castile, right?
Oh yeah.
Right? Where was the NRA when that shooting happened? Where was the statement about the sanctity of concealed carry?
Right.
Bullshit.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that really just infuriates me. You want to see the hypocrisy of the NRA. You want to see how gun policy and racism are intertwined. That was the case right there. There's others, but that one was crystal clear, right? So but all of what's the common denominator in all that? It's fear, and this is what you sell. This is the dollar piece. You sell this, but who's buying it? Everybody. Lots of people are buying into this. They're afraid. And by the way, this is important for us, right? This brings us back to practicalities, the pragmatics of being a physician and being in an advisory role or a leadership role. You can't fight fire with fire. You can't extinguish fear with more fear.
That's right.
You can't scare people out of these things, right? You've got to convince them that there are better ways to be safe. If you're going to use data, you want to show people, here's how we make you safe. I don't want you to be more afraid. If you tell people I'm taking your guns, you are adding fear on a layer of fear. You're you're not going to get very far. Believe me, I've tried, right? I've tried, you know. You can't shame people who are already feeling ashamed, right? That whole deplorables thing did not work out well for
No, it did not.
in 2016, right? And you can't scare people out of being afraid. We need to have a higher EQ approach to this for emotional intelligence. More questions?
So let's say we get law enforcement like kind of behind like the discussion on gun violence, because you give like a good guy a gun, you're basically saying this good guy can take care of everything. He'll be a good shooter, he can handle the pressure well, he can basically get the bad guy. So I guess my question is, why hasn't law enforcement kind of come out and said you can't do our job?
So, great question. Most law enforcement will tell you that they actually want stricter gun laws because they're trying to clean up the mess behind it, and they will definitely tell you that we've got a problem. More guns is not the answer. They'll tell you that in many cases, in many communities. Some communities may be different depending upon that bend. I was interestingly enough, some sheriffs are often elected on political lines. That's always interesting as well. So to your point, let's take the George Zimmerman case. Concealed carry, he was on neighborhood watch. Police flat out told him, do not pursue. We're coming. Do not pursue. He gets out, he pursues. He gets his butt whipped and then claims self-defense. I mean, right there's another case of you're not trained to do this. This is not your job. I have a brother who's a cop, by the way, so I'm speaking with some level of understanding. He's a police officer in Arlington, Texas. And he'll tell you, we're not even trained to do a lot of what the public expects us to do. They're not trained to shoot to stop. They're trained to shoot to kill. They're not the movie at 30 meters away and hitching your knee and disarm the bad guy and money goes. That's not what they're there to shoot to kill. They're often not trained also to de-escalate. They're there to end the situation, which may result in, a death if necessary. I do think, to your point, there is an expectation gap between what we expect our law enforcement to do versus what the reality is, and then vice versa, what are their expectations of us as everyday citizens? And I think that goes back to the larger conversation the community has to have around what is your responsibility as a gun owner. I agree. I don't feel comfortable that y'all have a gun. I don't know you. You're not trained. What sort of background do you have of being a good guy that's going to all of a sudden make me feel safer? Oh, yeah, because you could be the person who's now being targeted. Just over here at Walmart, for example. You guys remember that whole case where... Yeah. Just twirling the gun. Wasn't pointing it, wasn't shooting, just had the gun in the gun section. Toy gun. In Walmart. Came in less than, maybe 7 seconds? Shot, killed, gone. Now I got a question. What if that was someone who was not of color? Ever seen a black gun club? Don't worry, I'll wait. You don't see one. You know why? They'll come and shut the thing down so darn fast and make your head spin. So there is a complete disconnect in how he's exactly right. Because race inequalities are baked into a lot of this. The fear, them versus us versus them. There's always got to be a them. If you notice, NRA, they're masterfuls at making a them. Oh, they're good at it. Even in situations you don't even think there's a them, they'll find the them. Even if it's the government. That's like the fallback to all fallbacks. You can't blame this group with that group, them, there's that government.
But so we're talking about with this ridiculous notion of keeping the guns in the hands of the good guys, but we don't even do a good job with that, right? Because this background check, I mean, with the Brady law, we required background check of all licensed dealers. But guess what? Most guns aren't by a licensed dealer, and when you have a gaping loophole and you restrict one part, the loophole just gets bigger, and then what ends up happening is, you've got the gun shows where anyone can sell a gun to anyone. I mean, there's 12 states in the United States that have closed the gun show loophole, but there's still cross-state, trafficking of guns, so it becomes becomes a null issue. But in the states, like Ohio does not have a closed gun show protocol. So if you come to a gun show, and I've seen pictures of the gun shows. I mean, everything from like, the swastika flags in the background, so disturbing. This is the gun show, and we will sell you a gun, and you really don't need to show anything to anybody, or private citizen to private citizens. Anyone can buy a gun from anyone. So there's not even an attempt to make sure the good guys have the guns, because we have this incredible, and when you ask people, when you talk about sensible gun laws, one, universal background checks actually does help to reduce homicides. Two, most Americans, even most gun-owning Americans, agree that there should be a universal background check. And again, it's like, how is it that everybody agrees? Everybody agrees.
90%.
And yet, it's like, well, why are we doing this? Everybody agrees that universal background.
It's political will, and again, it
But
comes
at
back to
what
things
point
like-
are we going to say enough is enough? I mean, it's insane. What sort of it's crazy.
Well, we sort of do have the best money, best government money to buy. Ultimately, it's a political will question, and campaign finance is a big piece of that. The power of the NRA is a big piece of that, and those are some interlocking pieces you're going to have to disassemble before you really change there. Because you're right, there's all sorts of things we have the power of a referendum behind. That people stand for. Look, if you were to ask all of America today whether Trump should be impeached, he's got 60-some% going against him right now, right? There isn't the political will of Congress to do that. So that's the disconnect. You have the will of the people, and you have political will, and those are not in alignment with guns or with a lot of other things.
So after Sandy Hook, to illustrate your point, after Sandy Hook, legislation was introduced, right? 90% of America said some sort of gun law, something needs to happen, right? In the legislation, it was crystal clear that it made it illegal, not legal, it made it illegal to create a gun registry. It said not going to, Republicans insisted on having it in there to make sure, okay, it would be illegal to create a gun registry. You know what the NRA did? They flat out lied. Not misinformation, not disinformation. They targeted vulnerable senators and basically told their constituents, put it out there and said they're going to create a gun registry. And all they had to do was get a couple communities riled up, and phone calls came to those senators and says, hey, you got to shut this down. They're going to create a gun registry. Those senators knew the truth. No, there's not going to create. Well, I'm telling you now, if you don't do this, you're going to get primary. We're not going to vote you back. Guess what they said? You can't vote for it.
Gun registry means Big Brother tracking you, sort of 1984 kind of apocalyptic visions of the future. That's what they're vending here. I don't know if any of you saw some of the recent propaganda commercials coming from the NRA, but they're basically saying, a war is coming, right? This is the language. This is how they're languaging this now. They're scaring the Jesus out of people, and they're afraid of the government. They're afraid of the people that the government can't control. And this is what they understand the market. They're trading in fear. They get it.
You have any gun background checks happen on Black Friday? Yep.
Nice.
Record number. Yeah. Yeah.
200.
Question. You guys feel safer? All right. I don't.
You get them on Amazon, or like where do you go for Black Friday guns?
Walmart. Walmart is the biggest gun dealer in the country.
Wow. We should change it to lordofwar.com.
Some thoughts about that, but yeah.
So another question here. We were talking earlier that we don't think it's possible to socially engineer the culture to move away from this, but from what I've been hearing, it sounds like we've been socially engineered to be in favor of getting more guns, to load ourselves up. So is there a way that we could either reverse engineer this, or while the engineering that's already going on? I'm thinking of tobacco use, for example, just how our campaign has, at least from what I've seen, worked so effectively to reduce tobacco usage, at least among young folk.
So one thing I will say is that the narrative of gun violence or of guns in general is a little bit different because it is a narrative based on the big R word, racism. It is. When you think about this too, that is still America's original sin. We still haven't reconciled. We still haven't dealt with it. And as long as you can sell that fear, as if there's always a them, that is a narrative that stretches back to the founding of this country. So that is deeply embedded in a lot of what we do, what we say, how we behave, how our society is literally structured. There are still some institutions that have structured themselves on the basic concept of inferior, less than, so on and so forth. That still exists. So we haven't, the work of equality and equity is still vastly underway. So that narrative, that cultural engineering, them just tapping something's always been there, right? The counter to that are like your Dr. Kings of the world, who basically stand up long enough to get killed. Name one black leader that hasn't been assassinated. Don't worry, I'll wait. It doesn't happen too often, right? So unless folks are willing to die for this and really make a stand for it, you might be able to make some legislative laws against it, but just saying that that narrative is deeply embedded and there's always something to sell, there's always a them, there's always that, because we're structured that way in this country.
I'm happy to say that Obama has not been assassinated. I have to say, I worried about it when he was, in 2008, I cried when he won. I couldn't believe, I thought, wow, America's becoming what it should be. And then frankly, the counter-reaction force. But I have to say, here's something about human psychology, I think, that is fairly reliable. And that is that most people are not philosophical enough or philosophically oriented enough to distinguish that which is legal from that which is moral. And so people tend to follow, it's a sort of a reverse causal chain, but they sort of tend to think of those things that are legal are good and okay and normal, right? So if you change the law, right, then people start to go, oh, that's just okay. Well, we just watched this happen with medical marijuana in Ohio, right? Marijuana is for evil hippies, right? Oh, it's legal? Oh, well, then my grandma can have it. It's like, being legal makes it okay for people. Some people don't think any more deeply.
Unless it's healthcare.
What's that?
Unless it's healthcare.
Well, that's more than but it's true. So I think, in some ways, we almost have to, it's sort of a fake it till you make it thing. It's like, change the laws, change, make, I think it's, the fact that we had a black president means that people aren't going to see that as an abnormal anymore. So that's the new normal. And so now we don't have, that's a barrier we can get over, right? We still need a woman president. We still need a couple other, a gay president, a few other things.
Call me a naive pediatrician, but I think if we care enough, things can change. And I think we do have to get back to getting, first of all, we need to reverse that, 1996 CDC ban on, research and then the Health and Human Services and the alcohol, tobacco, firearm, all of this thing that was done to squelch knowledge and information. Get rid of that. Let each doctor with each patient spend a little bit of our credibility to teach, to say this matters enough, where I am spending 4 or 5 minutes of I'm already 2 hours behind schedule and I'm not going to get home for dinner to talk to you about this?
Well, this is about normalizing. I think we normalize the conversations about guns. It becomes okay to talk about it. If you lift the ban on the research, then it's not a verboten subject anymore. We're having the same issue going on with medical marijuana, and we've had, because of the DEA, we've had almost no research into the benefits and the risks of medical marijuana. It's really a terra incognita for us. But now that we're saying, okay, this is going to be something legal, the attitudes are shifting with this. We're normalizing, I think that's what has to happen. We need to make it okay to talk about, okay to research guns, okay to have some restrictions on guns and feel like that's a normal.
Yeah.
for people. And I don't think you're going to be able to engineer the culture and have the law follow. I think we're going to have to engineer the law and have the culture follow.
And I take naive pediatrician. He totally call you that, so well done. I take the
I hope I die a naive pediatrician.
No, I think that there is hope, and I think that we do have to have hope. And in some cases, I take a cynical view of the fact that, unfortunately, we have proven time and time again that until we can figure out an alternative financial solution, the actual solution is a moot point. It's often about financially figuring out who's gonna make money or who's gonna lose money. And unfortunately, that is often the conversation that has to be figured out and thought through before meaningful change can begin to happen. And Dr. Leeds, this is when we were here, I was talking about even the prison industrial complex. Now there's bipartisan support because they realize it's no longer a financially viable model. And the present system has already moved to creating a home probation system because they've already figured out the financial model. Now it's okay to, we've got our jails overpopulated and we shouldn't be locking people up. These are better alternatives. Well, there are now because they've already figured out the financial model for it.
Well, there's validity to that. You know, we've certainly watched that happen in the tobacco industry. I mean, why has Philip Morris and Reynolds been a little more willing to kind of go along with, you know, tobacco teaching and changing their product to make it less addictive and all of these other things? Why have they been open to this? Well, I can tell you, I lived in Richmond where Philip Morris is headquartered, and the answer there is they diversify. It doesn't cost them as much money now. They can afford to be generous under these circumstances. When their main product line was evil death lung poison, they pretty much had to protect their financial interests there. So maybe, you know, maybe we need to incentivize gun makers to make things that aren't lethal, you know, or, yeah, I don't know, maybe they can, you know, make guns that point in a different direction than at our own people.
Guns that
you know,
confetti.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, but maybe they need to be encouraged to diversify in some way. They have a technology, they have a lot of money sunk into their technology. Maybe there are other things that guns can do that are, you know, that have nonviolent applications. I don't know. I mean, that's not my field.
But if you say we take this stepwise, right? We get rid of the long view of get rid of the guns, and we say let's create a more safe world with guns. I mean, we've done this. We've done this with car safety. You know, yes, cars kill people. Cars kill a lot of people, but we mandated that seatbelts, car seats, booster seats, you know. Yeah, everybody has to have a license. You don't just get a car. You just don't just walk up and be able to drive a car. You have to prove that you know how to drive the car, that you know how to follow the laws, that you know that they can remove your license if you break the laws. I mean, so it's like there's steps that we can make that are within the paradigm of everybody can keep their guns.
Well, you know, if cars were invented in 2016 instead of, you know, 100 years ago, there would be an NCA, right, the National Car Association. They would fight any attempt to create legislation involving licensing, insurance, registration, right, life, freedom, or nothing, right? You know?
But we fought that. Why should people be telling me to put my seatbelt on? That's my right not to wear a seatbelt. If I want to get into a car accident without a seatbelt, that is my right.
Well, because you know why? There's a collectivism that says, well, what you do in your car affects the population at large. Well, guess what? That hasn't translated over to the gun culture yet. That what you do does have a direct impact. But for some reason, this sacred thing of a gun, I'm just like, it's so sacred in our minds that it's my divine right as an American to have one.
But culture, you know, the seatbelt thing is an interesting idea as a model for cultural change. I grew up in the rock tumbler in the back seat. You might survive to get to Wendy's, or maybe not. Era, right? So we had the bench seats, right? My parents had a '66 Ford Galaxy in the back seat. You were thrown back there, and God help you if anything kinetic happened that wasn't rectilinear motion, right? So this is really true. I mean, this is, and you know, people were thrown out of cars all the time. Kids too. There were no car seats, none of that stuff, right? It was wild, wild west. So then I watched the cars in the 70s and 80s become progressively safer vehicles in so many different ways. And for a while they even banned convertibles and you had to have a roll bar and stuff. That's kind of changed. But now, you guys all buckle up, don't you? Most of you do. I do, right? I didn't grow up buckling up, but I do, right? What happened? What was the cultural shift? Well, was that? Say again?
It's a national.
Right, but what, so again, what happened was they started, car manufacturers would put seat belts in these cars and they would cram under your seat and then disappear and nobody cared about it, right? And that, during the 80s, they had seat belts that would buckle you in automatically, you had no choice, or they would beep at you until you went insane and had to put them on. I think that still happens, right? But look what happened is they changed the car, created a new normal, right? The new normal is, of course, the seatbelt's here, that's the default. They went from the default of no seatbelt to, of course you wear a seatbelt. And now people wear them. Most people wear them, right? So there's a lesson in there somewhere. Again, it's something about setting a new normal so people go, well, of course, now it's, of course I'll have a gun. How do we get people to think, well, of course guns are dangerous. Why would I want them? You know?
And to your point, you're right. I think there are a lot of additional factors. As I mentioned, NHTSA is, and still is, a driving factor around a lot of that. There were institutions set up by the government to investigate this, right? The National Highway Traffic Safety Association. A lot of that affected the car industry. Without a NHTSA, there was no pressure on the legislators to say, hey, did you know this, guys? Oh, well, car industry, what are you doing to help us protect this? Well, without without rolling back the 1996 regulation, the CDC to even investigate it, you don't have clear, concise evidence to affect legislatures, which they probably listen today, but then to actually put pressure on the gun industry itself. So I agree with you. I think there is a lesson there, and I think it's multifactorial of public and private research, public cry to make this work, and of course, at the end of the day, who doesn't want to protect kids in a car? I mean, of course, that's an easy sell, right? So I think there was a lot of factors that helped make that happen. How can we recreate those conditions?
I think making safer guns is still that's a vibrant idea, right? Because remember, these people are afraid. We don't want to mount fear on fear. So what do? We say, you have guns, they make you safer, you think. All right, we'll see you that for the time being. But the gun has risks, right? There's a risk-benefit ratio. Everything has that. How do we mitigate those risks? Let's start selling the idea of safer guns to people. And it's not just the technology of the guns. It's also, how do we have a safer gun environment? I think we do that incrementally, you know. And eventually we get to the point where we evolve, we turn into beings of pure energy. We don't need guns anymore. You can't shoot pure energy, right? This is my Star Trek sort of thing.
I saw that episode.
And on the Star Trek note, any more questions?
So what about in countries that have pretty much said, if you want to own a gun, you have to join the military? Could that ever be implemented in the US?
A well-regulated militia, you mean?
Pretty much.
Okay. Could that be a solution? Well, so there's another piece to that, right? So with other countries, and you know, I've got some friends in other countries, and there is the additional training and post-military experience. You know, we have a lot of individual PTSD, a lot of folks who suffer from whatever level of mental health we want to categorize it as. I think for something like that to work, we have to also address that, right? We have to address what that looks like. And even from a gun violence standpoint, here's an initiative that I'm now working on now. You know, I've served on multiple things throughout the city. There was this SERV, the Community Initiative to Reduce Gun Violence. I was on their steering committee for years, and we looked at models from Pittsburgh, Chicago, ceasefires, all that kind of stuff, right? And all of them were based on the premise of giving individuals resources to help them become more productive citizens, right? That was the basis of it. You had case managers, you had job training, and all these things, right? Well, after doing some digging, I looked through some protective factors of what, in terms of gun violence, right? You know, there's extracurricular activities, there's all these protective factors. You know what's not listed as a protective factor? mental health coaching, addressing the mental health issues that people have. Think about this. If you witness someone get shot, your friend gets shot, your family, relative, you've experienced the trauma. Guess what? There's no mental health help for that person. It doesn't exist. So we're trying to take a different approach. Instead of just throwing resources at a person and say, hey, become a functioning citizen, although you've experienced trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma, and we want you to maintain a job and pay your taxes, good luck. So whoa, let's address the trauma first. Why can't we get some people some mental health? If any one of you all experienced a loss in the family, a traumatic loss, chances are you want to talk to someone about it, you want to get some, things worked out, right? Why don't we look for gun violence victims? Again, most people who retaliate back, they've lost someone in the process. We haven't dealt with that. We just have not dealt with
Breaking a cycle.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, what you're discussing in our fields is called toxic stress. It's that chronic negative stress that then, the ACEs, the adverse childhood events that lead to the social determinants of health. So saying that, your risk of diabetes, your risk of heart disease, your risk of all of these chronic, lifelong medical problems really stems with your epigenetics and the milieu in which you developed. And did you have a chronic, pituitary cortisol response? Because we were meant to be, fight or flight. We were meant to have these brief moments of stress and then withdrawal. But if you were constantly, day in and day out, living in a community that's stressful, it changes who you are and who you become. But that's a whole different discussion of how do we make our society healthier. How do we make us
4 day weekends.
Not the opposite of my house.
Not for any of you.
It's a good start.
You're going into medicine. I forgot to tell you, you don't get. We will never get 4 day weekends.
Okay, so we get 4 day weekends. You already got the marijuana thing happening. I think there's so kidding.
Any other questions then? Well, thank you so much for your time. This was excellent now.
Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, same here. Great question. Really appreciate
Well,
this.
thanks. Yeah, it wasn't just me. It was everybody that helped out here. So.